Hello, and welcome to Firecat First Friday in November of 2020. I am very pleased to welcome my dear friend and colleague, Steve Schang of Midwood Usability. Take it away, Steve.
It's amazing the quality of research we can do now and basically the availability of it. So, and also just wanted to mention that most of my experience has been in financial services. I have a lot of domain knowledge in financial services, although recently my clients have been from various different industries, some California technology companies, some brick and mortar businesses here in Charlotte, even had North Carolina Lottery a few years ago as a customer, which was a really interesting study because we actually got to have people buy lottery tickets during the session online. Anyway, with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. So whenever I hear of remote testing tools, one of the first things that comes to mind is when things like user testing and user Zoom and these unmoderated remote tools came out, everyone was so excited because they were affordable. They basically made usability accessible to the masses. And at that point, it almost seemed like as long as you had user testing or some kind of remote unmoderated type of tool, that's all you needed for usability. And it always made me think of this quote is that if you have a hammer, then everything is a nail. And it's not quite true. Those unmoderated tools have their place as well as moderated. And I'm going to discuss some more about that. But it's something to keep in mind because I think a lot of teams that I've worked with will get a tool and then that's all they have. That's all they use. And then they're surprised sometimes because the testing can give them some false positives or not quite give them accurate information on what they're trying to test. So just initially is why do usability? And this is just sort of a high level background type of question and just to define what it is. And with usability, we're watching real users. We're wanting to hear what they have to say. It allows you to quickly learn what works and what doesn't when you're designing an interface, so whether it's a mobile app or a website. When you're listening to users and watching them use your product, you can discover unmet needs. You'll see things that they're struggling with that you didn't think about, that you can create a solution for. It's a great way to validate your strategy and your requirements because you can determine if what you're designing actually meets the business needs, if people can actually use it and get through it. And also, it's a great way to reduce risk and project failure because you can identify problems up front. And hopefully, if you're doing usability early in an iterative fashion in your design process, you can fix problems, test those fixes before you get through to the end. But user research is just more than usability. And so Susan, can you do, I think there was the first poll question, I wanted to get a sense of what everyone's experience with usability. So the first question was going to be who's done usability as part of their role or had used it in their design process and seen it happening. If you just want to raise your hands, I see Chris raised his hands, Matthew. Oh, Susan raised her hands. Great. So with that, so it sounds like there are some people who maybe haven't done usability and so I wanted to just give a quick overview because I always like to start at the 50,000 foot view and sort of set the context for user research across product design because we'll delve down into the actual usability testing and the remote testing as part of this. But it helps to understand where you can use user research in all phases of the development process. And so I usually think about user research in three areas in product design. There's strategic research, where you're trying to understand user context, identify and articulate unmet needs, develop empathy. Then this is sort of a high level type research, and it's very qualitative. Think ethnography or brainstorming or design thinking type sessions. Innovation with user research. This is once you sort of understand your user, your context and your user needs, then you can use the research to gather feedback on what kind of solutions are going to solve those problems and do early validation. And then there's tactical research, which is this is what most usability teams or user researchers focus on, and what most people think of when they think of user research or usability. And this is you've got a prototype, it's paper, it's clickable, you've got a actual website, maybe you're in a QA environment, and you have people go in and do tasks in that, and it's and you observe what works and doesn't work. I call this tactical because you have to have at this point you have done some design. Your ideas of what you want to build are getting pretty well formulated, and so the user data at this point is coming in to fix UI problems, and hopefully you've already identified like you're solving the right problems using strategic or innovation or research during the innovation phases. And then just real quick, some of the research methods that can be used in each of these phases. You can see when we talk about strategic, it's ethnography, field research, competitive usability, innovation, where we're still exploring ideas, doing innovation games, rapid prototyping, user-centered design, or participatory design type activities where users sort of help rank and prioritize features. And then the tactical testing, this is traditional task-based usability. We can do remote usability, eye tracking, card sorting. These are all things, again, methods to help refine the designs. So this is I really like this slide. It's from Nielsen Norman Group, and I just showed this again to show you if you're starting to look at user research in your product development or your product design, there's all kinds of methods that you can use. So depending on what you need to know about your users and your solution, there's a method for it. And so on this, oh man, oh, there we go. So on this, the top of this, we have the two axes are behavioral. So we're on the methods, you are either observing behavior or you're capturing attitudes. You can do qualitative, which is very rich feedback with fewer number of participants, and then quantitative, thinking traditional surveys or market research, where you're getting higher sample sizes and more statistically significant things. To boil it down, the behavioral we're looking at what people do. For attitudinal, it's what people say. And one thing that's really important when we're talking about usability testing is what people do and what people say can be two totally different things. And from a pure usability perspective, I really care about what people do. What people say, I'm less concerned about it. I know a lot of times clients and product owners or marketers are really interested in, do you like this one better or do you like that one better? Or would you use this? And those kind of questions from a usability perspective are not as meaningful to me, because I know that at the end of the day, what they're doing, what they do can be totally different. And I'll touch on that some more in a second of why that's important. Quantitative is how many and how much, and then why and how to fix. And so when we talk about usability, our traditional usability, we want to look at what people are doing and why and how to fix it. And then I put this blue band around here just to, some of the tools I'll go over today are really well suited for the stuff inside this blue circle. I will say there are some new online tools that can do some rudimentary eye tracking using webcams. And Toby is one of the companies that does that. I have not used their product. Typically, eye tracking is something that you had to do in the lab in person because you needed special equipment for it. Okay, next poll. I was going to ask about
I can actually do a poll, I think. Let me try.
Okay. I don't know if I can see, I don't know how to see poll results. Oh, here we go. Who tests? Oh, yeah, this is good.
You wrote this.
Usually,
glad you like
yes. This is the second question, right?
So we'll give just a couple of minutes. Everybody gets to answer. Steve, you can even answer if you like. Still coming in, the results. I don't mean to trigger PTSD on anybody who's sick of hearing about polling results or other types of results. I'll just take a moment to say I am so glad to be hanging with you people this morning instead of watching that fun stuff, fun, distracting stuff. All right, do you want to keep going? I'm going to end the poll.
Okay. Oh, do you have the results?
I do.
Are you? Oh, here we go. All right. So it looks like who usually runs your studies. We've got a mix of internal researchers, some product owners, designers, and then about half the people don't do usability. Perfect. So, so I want to talk a couple more slides, just setting the stage for some important things about running effective usability, and then also and then we'll get into some specific tools that I've been using recently. And so one big question people have is the moderated versus unmoderated testing. So when we look at usability testing, there you can either moderated means I sit down with a participant and facilitate a session. So I will sit there and I'll give them a prototype, I'll give them a website, I'll give them some stimulus to react to, and I'll give them a task. I'll set up a scenario and then give them a task. And then I'll just sort of sit back and watch them do the task. And as they're doing the task, I get them to think out loud. They're telling me what they're thinking, doing, feeling. And then when they think they're done, they tell me they're done. And then I ask some follow-up questions. And that is the essence of what a moderated session looks like. Unmoderated sessions, you use a tool like usertesting.com, Loop 11, any number of them. There's a lot of them now. And it's basically like a super survey. And you program in your task, so it'll present the user with a task that they read, and then they'll have to start the task and they'll click through stuff. And at some point, there's a interface that says, "Are you done?" And they can say, "I'm done." And then some of them you can have people think out loud, which means they're talking as they're doing the task. And then, or there's no think out loud, and they complete the task, and then you measure metrics on the back end of whether they got to the web page you thought they should get to, or they gave you an answer that they were supposed to give if they did it correctly. So with moderated testing, the key points for me are the facilitator skills are critical. The facilitator needs to be able to ask questions in an unbiased way. So basically set up the task so they're not leading. One of my favorite examples of a non-leading task is, let's say you're testing a login widget, like you've done something to redesign your login widget. A biased task would be, okay, log into our website. Show me how you would log into our website. You're telling the user what to do. They're listening to the keyword login. They get to your homepage. They see login. You told them what to do, and they do it. A better way to frame that task is if they need to get to view their account details, you would create a task like, show me how you would change your email address in your account and start them on your homepage. They have to go through login to get to that task. And that way, you've just created a task where they're doing what you want them to do, but you didn't tell them to do it. And 1 second, let me just make sure I'm not missing any chats. Ask questions. Yes, framing. Susan mentioned in the chat, framing task is an art form, and we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. So with moderated sessions with the facilitator there, you can deep dive on issues. This happens all the time when you're running through a test. The user's going along, doing their task, and then they pause, and they sort of crinkle their face, or they go, and they make a grunting noise or something, and you know something's going on. And if you're moderating it, you can stop them right there and say, hey, what you thinking? What's going on? And then dive into that. If in an unmoderated test, unless you specifically ask a question, the users are not going to answer it. So even though you're telling them to think out loud, they don't know to stop and explain why they just grunted or why they just made a funny face. In a moderated test, you can redirect at dead ends. So a lot of times we're testing prototypes. The users will go down a path that's not built out on the prototype, and they get stuck, and they'll start clicking around. You can artfully take them to the right place. And this is something that happens all the time, especially when users are really getting lost. They'll start getting frustrated, and I'll ask them, so if you saw the link that you're looking for, what would it look like? And then they would tell me, it would say account settings. And then I say, in the old days when we did in-person testing, I would say, okay, turn your head to the side. And then I know the prototype, so I'd click and take them to the account settings page. And I would say, okay, you saw that link that said account settings, and it took you here, so continue the task. So that way I'd know that they failed the task because they ran into a dead end, but I can still complete whatever the end thing was they were trying to do because I could get them to that page. If you're doing unmoderated remote and a user gets stuck in your prototype, they will start talking about stuff that has nothing to do with your prototype. And a lot of times, like even if you're using Envision or Marvel app, these online prototyping tools, they'll start talking about the Envision UI because that's what they're seeing, and they think it's part of what you're testing. You can, in the moderated testing, you can clarify scenarios and tasks. So sometimes, especially if you're dealing with complex subjects, like in the banking world, if you're doing a loan application, you'll get questions complex questions about is this a joint app or not, or what specifically are they looking for? And so it helps that you can clarify in a moderated session. You can do longer sessions. Typically, moderated sessions will be 30 minutes to 60 minutes. Unmoderated, because people are there by themselves, I find that anything longer than like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, they start losing interest. And it's hard to get really good feedback for 30 minutes or 60 minutes if it's an unmoderated study. Moderated, you have more methods available. Basically, anything you can do except for, you can do any method with moderated. And then you get richer insights because you get people talking and you can probe on what they're saying. And the great thing now about moderated testing today, and we're going to talk about some of these, is recruiting tools. In the past, if you wanted to do recruiting, you would go to a market research agency in your town, and they would make phone calls and call their panel and schedule it. It took a long time. It was expensive. There are now a couple really good tools where you can sort of self-serve your own recruiting and do it quicker, and it's a lot cheaper. There are some limitations though. Unmoderated testing, one great advantage of it that is you can do quantitative usability, so you can get 20 to 30 participants doing a task, really easy and fast. A lot of the tools have their built-in panels, so it's super easy to recruit people. One drawback to watch out for is the quality of participants on like a usertesting.com or UserZoom. I saw this more with usertesting.com. You'll get professional testers because what they're doing is they're just going into their interface and looking for tests, and they just sit there in the evenings and do a bunch of tests. Now, the back end of those sites, they try to control for the quality of participants, and you can reduce repeat participants. But I find a lot of times, and you can tell when someone starts talking on a unmoderated think out loud, if they're actually a professional tester, because what they're doing is they will start using design lingo and UX jargon as they're going through it. And then as soon as you start hearing that, and they'll also say just all good things. As soon as you start hearing those things, those are cues. Oh, go ahead, Susan.
Can you give us a couple examples? Like what kind of things would red flag you if you heard it?
Okay. Yeah, they'll, oh gosh, you put me on the spot for an example. They will talk about, they may start talking about if they use words like, oh, the hamburger menu, like that. We all know that in the design world is the little 3 hamburgers, or the kebab, which is 3 dots. As soon as that's a good key that they know too much about design, because most people just don't know what a hamburger menu is, or what you would call it.
Right, or maybe they referring to navigation at all, like the navigation design, that kind of thing.
Yeah, trying to think of a good, yeah, if they start saying, oh, this top nav, or this footer, or this universal nav, or if they start talking about, if they would say something like, oh my gosh, if they said, oh, this is, if they would say something like responsive design, or this is flat design, you know, that's not how normal people talk about websites. They talk about, they know what a link is. I mean, most people don't even know what the URL bar is in the browser. If you say, they won't call things by their right name. So
we might have to have you back to talk about participant selection, but I'm taking you down the rabbit hole. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's it's fun. And, you know, and the one thing with this is, because I've been doing this so long and I've seen all these things so many times, like it comes second nature to me about the quality of the participant, and that especially a lot of new people, when they start, they may not pick up on some of those clues right away. So back to the unmoderated. This is something I remember back in, see, I'm dating myself, like back in 2001. And you would have, you know, everybody was a web designer because HTML was so easy. The VP of whatever is like, hey, I can make a web page, you know, do it just like this. And the same thing is sort of happened, but doesn't mean that they should be designing, because there's a lot more to design than just being able to code some HTML. with these unmoderated tools, everybody's become a researcher because they've set them up and they've marketed them that like it's so easy. You just create your task and you launch it and you get your feedback. Well, there's a lot of thought that goes into proper study design and task design, and like Susan mentioned, framing the task, and then also even things like setting up your prototype. One thing I see a lot is a lot of teams use Envision or Marvel app because it's really easy for designers because it integrates great with Adobe XD and Sketch. Can just spit stuff right out into those prototyping tools. Well, when you launch those prototyping tools in a usability test, if you don't turn off the hotspots, the participants in about 10 seconds learn where they can click. Also, there's some of the prototypes. If you don't build all the paths out, like some false paths in the prototypes to allow users to get lost while they're doing tasks, the users will always be successful because, and this is usually in those prototypes, or a lot of times, the only path that's built out is the happy path. And guess what? All the users find the happy path because they move their mouse around and they either see the hotspots in Envision or they can quickly see that there's a whole page of links. And as they scroll their mouse over it, it only changes to a hand on one of them. And then they're like, oh, that's where I go. And so that's a whole nother session on prototyping and how to build good prototypes. And then a big thing about unmoderated testing is you can't redirect and you can't explore an issue. So people will totally miss over something will happen that's really important. You'll hear it on the tape, and they won't even go anywhere with it because you're not asking them to. Yes, and Paul, I can't tell if you're being sarcastic or if that's serious, but I was assuming you're about the header and footer for layouts. It's that people know the sections. So yeah, people know the sections of the page, like it's the top of the page, it's the bottom of the page, but what the name of it is not, they won't call it that. They'll just say up here and they'll point to it, or they won't say, oh, this is the content area of the page. They'll say, oh, I'm looking at this article right here, or these words. All right, so I have a little story of tale of moderated versus unmoderated. Let me look at my time.
We're okay. A little more than halfway.
So I'll quickly go through this because I think this is a great story of unmoderated versus moderated. So working with a client, they're like, let's build a loan application, and it's going to be an app on a phone. And then our constraints are we love design thinking, so we're gonna, and we love the whole Silicon Valley, like let's be scrappy and do it quick and fail fast. So it's going to build an MVP, we're going to launch it quick, and we're going to iterate it once it launches. Team says, well, usability is important, let's test. We only have an unmoderated remote tool. The researcher says, don't worry, I got this. Super confident guy, is wed to the method of moderated testing, and is using it for everything. And so we're testing a complex product. It's a loan, so it's people's money. It's a big decision, and then and there's lots of process, and people also have a lot of history with loans. So if you've gone through a mortgage app at one point, or a car loan, like you sort of understand like the steps. You sit down and you submit an application, you get some interest rates and payments back, then you sign all this paperwork, and then you start making payments. And like, so people understand that there's this process. So when the testing was done on the app, it tested out great. The usability looked good because they asked people, back to that attitudinal versus behavioral, hey, do you like this? And then they were asking about the colors and the design of it. And everyone's like, yeah, it's sort of modern and edgy. And that's what the design team was going for. And then in the task, and this goes back to how to design good task, it was like, hey, you're going to apply for this loan, just show me how you'd fill this out. And I'm paraphrasing this a little bit. It's definitely a lot more complicated. And so people could, yeah, I see a name field. Yep, I'll type my name in. I see a phone number. Yep, boom, boom, boom. They could enter in all the information that was being asked for. There was no probing or understanding of, does this make sense to ask for this information at this point? What do you expect next? And also the whole process in the testing, because of how these unmoderated tools work and your prototype, it wasn't able to do the end-to-end process. And so each little piece of it was tested individually. And so the user never saw the whole context of it. Like, they didn't see what happens to, how do I get to this app in the first place? And then once I'm done with the app, what happens next with the loan? So the whole team got this huge false positive. This looks great. It's going to work. We love it. We're going to get this launched. And then there's some shakeups in the team, and they got a new designer, and they needed a new researcher. So they brought me in, said, hey, we're getting ready to launch. We've got this final design. Let's do some end-to-end testing on it to validate it. I sat down with the team, tried to understand like what they were doing, what their constraints were, what questions they needed answer. And my recommendation was, hey, let's do an end-to-end test and do it moderated, so we can get in and explore this whole issue. Because just looking at this, I can tell you, I think there are going to be some problems with this. And they're like, okay, that's fine, as long as you don't slow down our development process. And so we did it. And we discovered some stuff. And lo and behold, some of the stuff that was coming up was, the app was easy to fill out. Like, everyone could enter in all their information as they went through the app. The problem was, when you got to the end of that submission information, everyone was expecting to see information that they weren't seeing. Like, hey, I just did this application. Tell me what my rate is, or tell me what my payment's going to be. Oh, I didn't realize that I was doing a hard credit hit when I filled this out. Like, that's a big deal to me. I would never have done this if it was a hard credit hit. And those kind of things weren't even being discussed up front when people started the app. And so with the moderated testing, we could, even though we didn't have like the whole end-to-end process, we had to fake a lot of it, like the original marketing material and how people got there. You can do that in moderated testing, because I can sit down and tell the participant, okay, here's a scenario. Let's say, you're getting ready to buy a house, and you've already picked out the house and you need to pay for it. And then going through a series of steps like that, describe the scenario, make sure they're in character. And a lot of times with the unmoderated testing, you can't get people into character very easily. You have to be very deliberate about setting up those unmoderated studies to get people into the right frame of mind, so that they answer like truthfully. Like, if I was doing this for real, this is what I do. Because there's a lot of times in testing, I'll see that is people will be like, oh yeah, that's good, I can fill it out. Yep, that's great. And then I would ask you, well, if you were doing this for real and this was your money and you're doing it, would you do that? And they're like, oh no, I'd have to call at this point. Like, I wouldn't go any further. And so there's the ability to tease out people's true intentions is something that you can do a lot easier when you're facilitating a session than if it's an unmoderated. And at the end of the day, a lot of the solutions that we discovered from this moderated testing, we could do with simple design changes. It's just, and then, but it was just that the team didn't know that those were problems at that point. And the funny thing is they did launch the MVP, and a bunch of the big problems we discovered, we were getting reports back from operations in the call center, like, hey, users are calling about this. And, you know, if we had done that moderated testing back here, we could have prevented all those calls to the operations center down here once it's launched. Because once you launch something and it's a bad experience, like you don't get a second chance for that first impression from people, because they'll just remember, oh, that was awful.
I'd love for you to talk, just before you move on, talk a little bit about, I just want to hammer home, if you had it to do over again and they were listening to you, you would have said to do a moderated test when?
I would have, way back here, when they were coming up with this idea, I would have said, let's do some participatory design. Even let's just do some user interviews to understand the problem we're trying to solve, because they had a really clear idea of like, we want to build this app to do this. But it was one of the things that I was, you know, when I first heard about the project, was that this is a non-standard way to do this. Like, when users get used to doing things, and so if they're doing a loan app, or if they're paying bills, or if they're, you know, sending money via PayPal, like they get used to doing it. So for example, like PayPal, like you learn how to send money via PayPal. And so the next time you see a new money transfer service, you use all your collective memories of how PayPal works to try to learn how to use this, the new one. And if this is using a totally different method or experience to move the money, it's just confusing. And yeah, it could be easier, but if it's not like intuitive, it'll just be frustrating. And that was sort of what's happening here. So what we needed to do up front is validate this idea to learn where the holes were, like to get data and quotes and people saying, oh, that's a dumb idea. Okay, well, what would make it a good idea? And because there's certain ways, like what they were designing, like it had a place, but it wasn't quite, it was a different place than how they were planning on using it. And so doing that up front, to do some early validation, concept validation, exploratory stuff, like you could do group sessions, and then start doing quick prototypes, like high level, low fidelity prototypes, even paper. You can do remote testing with paper prototypes. And then just, you know, start testing out the flow and the idea with people, and then do it iteratively. So, and this is all stuff that you could do this kind of testing up front. You're doing like 4 people, 5 people at a time, real short sessions, you know, 30 minutes. And then, okay, these ideas, you know, they're working, these are not, let's tweak the design, redesign a little bit, paper prototypes or really low fidelity clickable prototypes. And then, and then start making sure that like the flow of what you're doing is matching the user's mental model, and then also either matches their mental model or provides them some like incredible benefit, like they can't live without. Because that's the way you get people to try something new, is like, oh, wow, this is, when they see it, it's like, it solves this unmet need. Like, oh, I didn't realize that was a problem for me. And this is, but it is a problem for me. This is fixing it.
Right.
So Paula asked about remote testing paper prototypes. So basically with these, what you do is you draw everything up on paper, and you just take pictures of it. And then you present those on a screen. And you could, it would be something where maybe I would share my screen, and I would have a picture of the piece of paper on my screen, and I would say, okay, here's your task. Looking at this page, where would you go on this page? Tell me where you would go. And then they would point to something and click on it, and then I would know where the next screen was. So I would bring that up. So you do it on paper, and then you transfer to images. Moreau whiteboard is a great way to do that because you can just put everything all up and then just sort of move the user around where they tell you to go. Okay, I'm not gonna, let's see, 46 minutes, but time check, okay, about 15 minutes left. So real quick on this is, I sort of like process and documentation. I think traditionally usability, we've over documented stuff and it's sort of frustrated design teams because it's like, hey, I don't want to spend 6 weeks running one usability test. We just set up something and run it today and give me results this afternoon? And that was the lure of these unmoderated tools. So at a minimum, these kind of questions need to be answered when you're setting up a study. It's like, what are we testing? Let's step back a second and make sure the methodology that we want to pick is going to answer the questions you're having and be able to get to those answers. Create some hypotheses about what you think is going to work, because when you're done with the test, basically you come back and say, you know, we had these 5 questions and here's the answer to them. And then, and what you don't want to do is just say, just go into a test without thinking ahead of time of what you're trying to get out of it. And then thinking about the task, you want to think about the participants. This is really critical, and finding people who are actual users or potential users. And I'll tell you one thing with that story was they actually did do some in-person testing, but they tested employees who weren't involved with the project. Sometimes that is okay to do. Most of the time it's not, because employees of a company have too much inside knowledge and domain knowledge of the product that they don't ask the silly questions that sort of stump normal people. Okay, team schedule. Oh, and then, you know, it's always a good thing to think about ahead of time how you're going to deliver the findings or document them, because it's great to get your feedback quick, but if it's helpful that as you start getting into a testing regime and doing this more often, is to be able to look back over time and say, you know, we've been seeing the same problem every time we test. That one icon, no one knows what it means. And, you know, if you can pull up like 5 Word documents that show that, it's a lot more powerful than just saying, hey, I'm the usability guy and I've seen this a bunch. And if people don't trust you or you don't have a lot of credibility, they're going to like, well, that's just what you're saying. But if you can have documentation, then it's easier to say, we've seen this over and over again. Okay, so poll, let's skip that. I just want to go in.
Okay.
Oh, wait, okay, yeah, remote moderator. No, yeah, let's skip the poll.
Just who has experience with which type of thing? Makes me want to do a whole lot more testing.
All right, so I'm going to just quickly go on, and because I realize I have too much to talk about and there's not enough time. Okay, so we've done a lot of remote moderated. Oh, that's good. 3 people have done that. And in-person moderated. Okay, perfect. So when you're talking about doing testing, you know, do you hire someone like me to come in and do it, or do you use your own team? There are some advantages and disadvantages of each. So bring someone in externally. You can find someone with expertise and experience who's been doing this for a while. And this is really helpful for new teams that maybe have junior researchers or no dedicated research capability. You could scale it up. Also outside eyes are always good when you're testing, because in the story I told, one of the problems was the designer and the researcher were just involved and especially the researcher was more involved in the design of the project than they probably should have been. And while and you never should be testing your own designs because you're biased. You like it too much and you don't want to hear anyone say anything bad about it. So you'll sort of unconsciously set up the task so people will say good things about it and not really tear it apart like they should. Okay, and so use your own team. The great thing about this is they know your product, they know the company, they know the people. There's probably a lot of availability because you can just say, hey, we need to run this test, Mr. Researcher, when can we get it done? Whereas like externally, you're looking at MSAs and SOWs, and you got to get approvals, and it's a lot of red tape to go through to get someone from the outside in. I will say at the end of the day, I'm always an advocate of it's better to test than not to test. It's also, if you're not a trained researcher, like put your, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the word. Recognize that you don't do this for a living, and like that there are some limitations. Like, yeah, I'll discover stuff, but there's a chance that I might be biased. There's a chance that I might not have written the task correctly. There are lots of little things, but it's still better to hear from users than not, because you will always learn something when you talk to a user. Okay, tools. We're gonna I wanted to stop real quick and see if there were any questions. And we can do in the chat. I'm looking at the chat right now. Or if people want to ask a question. I don't know if you can do that, Susan.
I can bring people on into the Brady Bunch thing. Do you want to just get through the tools thing and then I'll bring everybody on to ask questions interactively?
Yep, let's do that.
Okay.
So I'll quickly go through this.
And we can make the slides available to them after, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, please. I can do that. So this is just my high-level picture of, and this aligns with those steps in running a test. There's planning, recruiting, conducting sessions, analyzing. These are all the different tools that I've been using recently. And then I've also added in talks for another day so we can queue up some more of these sessions to get into the details. But what I'm sort of excited about is online recruiting. This is something that really, in the last 2 years, especially, and let me just go to the tools real quick. Respondent and user interviews have come online, and I've used both of them. I also mentioned the other, if you have usertesting.com and UserZoom, they also have their own integrated panels. So respondent and user interviews, all they do is recruit and schedule. And so you bring in your own testing software. You usually can just send out a link to people, like if you have Loop 11 or a Zoom link, whatever your testing platform is, you'll just add that into your recruit. But these tools, they both have their own panels, and they also allow you to bring your own people. You can create very robust screeners. So when you're looking for specific audiences or people who have specific products or usage, you can get as complex as you want in your screening. Respondent.io does something really cool. Once you launch a screener, they'll bring back a list of participants. Like if you're trying to fill 10 slots, they'll launch a screener until they get 50 people who qualify through your screener. And then you go through and you scan that list of people who passed the screener, and then you pick the ones you want. So if you're looking for you want good mixes of gender, demographics, or gender, race, education, area of the country, you can go through and hand pick, like I got my West Coast person, my East Coast person, my country person, my city person. I've got, 4 women, 4 men. I've got a good mix of racial diversity. So you can hand pick your people from the people who pass the screener. The other thing is they link their people who sign up in their panel to their LinkedIn profile. So if you're recruiting B2B type users, or you want to recruit you need to recruit stockbrokers, you can do that because you can look at their LinkedIn profile and verify who their current employee is. And then they pay with PayPal. The one thing I don't like about Respondent is if you bring your own users, they have to create a Respondent account to sign up for your studies. And then when you pay the incentive, Respondent takes a 5% fee off their incentive, which I find sort of lame, because if I tell a participant it's $100 for an hour interview, I want them to get $100, and with Respondent they get 95. So then I end up having to pay them like 105 or 110. User interviews, I just used this recently for a few studies. It has really easy scheduling interface. So when I talk about scheduling, these are great because for your study, you set it up and say, I need to recruit 6 people. And then I can test on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And here are my time slots, 8 o'clock, 9:30, 11, 12:30 to 4 each day. And then when the users come in, if they get through the point where they're qualified to be a tester, then they go in, and then there's an interface where they pick out the day and time, and then they're scheduled, and then the platform will send a bunch of reminder emails. And so, I found, and both these platforms integrate with Outlook and Google Calendar, so they can deconflict your own calendars if you already have meetings on them. User Interviews has a great demographic data filter. So when you're saying, hey, if you're using their panel, they've got like 10 different categories of criteria to select from. Like you can say, okay, I want this screener to just go out to people who are in this age range, live in this country, have this household income, and you can go through this whole series of things to help do that initial filter, as opposed to just blasting this out to everybody. They use Amazon gift card for their default payment, or this is great, they let you do your own payment. So if you wanted to do, set up your own PayPal, or you have some way to send Visa gift cards or something else, you can do that. And I love this with them because if you have your own participants, they don't need to create accounts to schedule themselves for a study. When you're working with participants, removing all the friction from getting them scheduled for an interview is super important, because people are always super sensitive about giving away their personal information, creating another, username and password that they have to manage. It's just a pain. So